All right, here we are. Okay, today is a challenging day as we study the book of Revelation. We've come through a host of chapters, and we're through about, I guess you could say over half the book, because there's 22 chapters, and we're in chapter 13, really chapter 14 today. But as we look at this today, I do want you to be available with a pen and a piece of paper, maybe a notepad or whatever, and I want you to write down some notes at times. And it would be nice and good if you're a faithful one and you're walking through the book of Revelation, that you just highlight these chapters. So when you can go back and when you finish, you'll have a highlighted segment of each chapter. And so when you can look back and see chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. So in chapter 1, for example, we have the introduction of the one who's giving the message, which is Christ. And what this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. So not only is it a revelation to us for the future, but it's a revelation of Jesus Christ. And so by Jesus and of Jesus, it's all about the culmination of what Jesus was all about. And so in chapter 1, chapter 2 and 3 are really the historical segments of the New Testament church age. The New Testament church age will be a segment in time that will not last forever. And so chapter 2 and 3 gives us those 7 stages of the New Testament church era. A whole lot more, but that's a simple statement of it. Chapter 4 is the throne room of God. We go into the throne room, we see God on the throne, and we see what's going on around the throne and before the throne and so forth. Chapter 5, there's a problem. The problem is there's a scroll or a book that needs to be opened, and there's a need for somebody to step forward with this worthy to open the book, and there's a problem because there's nobody able to do that. And of course John goes to weeping, and if there's a big issue about it, and the angel says, oh no, or really one of the elders, I think it is, says we have someone who is worthy. And so the lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world walks out and takes the scroll out of the hand of the one sitting on the throne, the right hand of the one sitting on the throne, and he begins to open it. As he begins to open it, of course, it begins to unfold. There begins to unfold these sealed judgments. We have the 4 horsemen of what we call the apocalypse, and then the many, many, many seals that unfold behind that. We've talked about all those, so I'm going into them. But then, of course, by that time, we're getting beyond the seals into the trumpet judgments, and we're talking about really the first 3.5 years of a 7-year time of trouble on the planet called the tribulation period. And so once we get to that point, we're halfway through by the time we finish those 7 vials and 7 trumpets. And so we're halfway through. And then God seems to take a break in chapter 12 and just kind of summarize the battle of the ages. And it gives us a picture of Israel and the child that is born from her, which is, of course, Christ. And Israel is the woman there in chapter 12 who's protected by God, and she flees into the wilderness. And there's a whole summary of world history seemingly there from God's perspective. Then we went to chapter 13. And in chapter 13, we really saw the coming of the Antichrist in a way as a monster. Now in chapter 4, chapter 5, as the sealed judgments begin to be unveiled in late chapter 5, early chapter 6, the Antichrist shows up as a white horse rider with a bow but no arrows. So it's peaceful. He is given this title. He is given this authority as a white horse, peaceful person with no bow, with no arrows. Therefore, he's not a warmonger. But things change, and he changes horses. He gets on a red horse, which he's bringing war. Then he gets on a black horse, which famine follows. Then he gets on a pale horse, of course, which brings death and Hades or hell. And so, which is a progression of war. So the Antichrist starts out very peaceful. We do know that he's a person that becomes a world leader, kind of like we have seen today in the world. We've got the Chinese leader and the Iranian leader and American leader and the European leader and whoever. But this Antichrist, this person, becomes a world leader on the stage because of the rapture of the church, the calling of the church, and the unsettledness, because of the terrible tragedies, seeming tragedies to the world with earthquakes and and meteors falling out of the sky and all things that create havoc on the planet. You know, a lot of the water going bad, a third of the trees burning up, a third of the grass, and eventually all the grass, and all the terrible things that begin to happen to the planet. Of course, the global warming people are setting all that up now, and they're blaming America and blaming the world for contaminating the world, and therefore that's what's going to be the causing all these earthquakes and all these terrible storms and all these meteors falling out of the sky. I mean, science will blame everybody, but the reality is God's bringing judgment. And of course, the Antichrist is peaceful at that time. But once we get halfway through, we get to chapter 13, he changes. And he becomes not the Antichrist, not a peaceful leader, but a beast. And he's referred to in chapter 13 as the beast. And there are really two beasts in chapter 13. There's the beast, which is the person who is the world's civil government leader who tries to rule the world. But then he has a false prophet, which is the other beast. He comes up out of the land. The Antichrist is symbolizing coming up in chapter 13 out of the sea. So we have these two beasts. We have a civil dictator, a government dictator, who is the Antichrist, and he has a religious leader, which is his false prophet, that helps him. And there's a whole lot of scenarios around that. That's in chapter 13. And so today, though, we're in chapter 14. We've got to chapter 14. Now, chapter 14, let me just make sure you understand this. We are halfway through the 7-year tribulation period. We're at the halfway point pretty much. We've come through we've come through the seal judgments and the trumpet judgments, and the vial judgments are left. We have 3 woes in the book of Revelation. Woe number 1, of course, it deals with the seal judgments. Woe number 2, the trumpet judgments, but there's one woe left. And that's in chapter 13, and we walk through the latter part of the tribulation period. Also, you got to remember that the global warming crowd and the group that's in the world today that tries to convince everybody that we're to blame for all the natural disasters, they will be on their high horse in that day in a big way, and they'll blame everybody but the reality of it. But God will send, and we'll even mention them here in chapter 14, 144,000 Jewish preachers to preach the truth, primarily to the Jews. That's the reason they're Jewish preachers, but also to the world. And then he will send 2 major power-filled prophets to preach in Jerusalem, around Jerusalem, and on TV. And so all the world will see this, and they will be killed literally because of their prophetic statements, and they'll be killed after 3.5 years, and they will really after a few years there, a few months, and they will lay in the street 3.5 days. That's what I was trying to say, 3.5 days, and then they will raise up, come back to life, and raise up into the heavens. So that's 2. Now the third one, in chapter 14 and 15 here, we'll have an angel that'll fly through heaven and give the everlasting gospel. So my point is this. All that global warming crowd and all the world will try to justify all this crazy stuff that's happening in the world, but there'll be these prophets and these preachers that will proclaim truth. And so there'll be a whole lot of people that will surrender to God. Now the church won't be here, and the regular gospel preachers and the gospel churches won't be here, but there will be a whole lot of preaching going on. And there'll be a whole lot of people saying, this is literally what's happening. That's what the Bible says. Watch this happen. This is going to be next, and it's next. And people will become believers. Now, a lot of them are dying for their faith. And by the time we get to the middle of the tribulation period, there's a whole lot of people dying for their faith. Matter of fact, even in chapter 5, he says, who are these people under the throne? He said, they are the ones who came out of great tribulation period and have given their lives, given their blood for the Lamb. And so here we are in chapter 14. Let's pray. Father, help us today to grasp this, to understand this, and to be able, Lord Father, to make some sense to this glorious book. You gave us this book as a gift. You told us we'd be blessed if we read it. So Lord, studying it, we know we'll be blessed. So today we commit this time to you, and we ask you to help us with it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Now, here we are in chapter 14 of the book of Revelation, okay? Now, and I looked, and a lamb stood on Mount Zion. Okay, this is Israel, right? And with him 144,000 having the Father's name written in their forehead. Okay, this is the middle of the tribulation period. These people are still alive. This 144,000 Jews that appeared back in chapter 11, that came to be marked with the seal of God. He said back in chapter 11 that the seal of God was going to be on these people, and they wouldn't be hurt. Nothing could hurt them. All the activities, all the tragedies, all the mess that was going on the planet wouldn't hurt them. And so now they're still alive, and they're still preaching. And so in chapter 14, we're at the middle of that stage of tribulation period. He said, and I looked and saw a lamb stood on Mount Zion, which we believe that Mount Zion, of course, is Israel. It's Jerusalem, that city there where the Temple Mount is, in Mount Zion. And with him 144,000 having his Father's name written in their forehead. Now we were told that they were marked. But here we're told how they were marked. The name of God is in their forehead. Now, at this time, the Antichrist is trying to get people to take a mark in their forehead or in their hand called the mark of the beast, which is his mark, 666, to identify with him. And we'll hear more about that here. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, the voice of great thunder. And I heard the voice of the harpers harping with their harps. And they sung a new song before the throne, before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. And these are they which were not defiled with women. He gives us a description. Up to this point, we don't have a description of these. We know that they come out of the 12 tribes of Israel. Of course, less Dan and implanted in the tribe of Manasseh, but that's all we knew. Now we know that they were not defiled with women. They are virgins. They're not married. I mean, they've dedicated their lives to preaching the gospel after they got saved. They are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruit unto God and to the Lamb. So apparently these were the first ones saved during the tribulation period, and he turned to the Lord, and they become his mouthpiece, and he marks them, he prepared them, and of course they were specially called out for this task. And it says, in their mouths was found no guile, and they are without fault before the throne of God. I mean, they're the John the Baptist. There are 144,000 John the Baptist. I mean, they're proclaiming truth and nothing can touch them at this time. He says, I saw another angel fly through heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. Now, up to this point, we've had this 144,000 Jews that primarily, we believe, preached to Jews. Then we had the two prophets that were Jews, and from what we can understand, they had power to do like Elijah and Moses could do when they were here. So they had a certain amount of power to display that they came from God, but they primarily were the Jews. Now, the whole world saw, I'm sure, because they were watching on teletrons in New York City and all over the world, and we have satellite dishes, television, everything now that we can identify and know how that can possibly be. But when this was written, nobody knew how that would be. But now we know how that would be. And so they were primarily preaching to Jews. But now there's a third wave of preaching, and this time it's done by angels, or an angel. So this angel is flying through the midst of heaven, and he has the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. So, before they were focused on Jews, this is kind of the last invitation, to be honest with you. This is really what this is. It's the last invitation. And so now he's inviting the rest of the world to come. And so they fly through the heavens and tell the truth. He says, this is what they're saying. They're saying with a loud voice, fear God. Give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. So, when the green people and all the people on the news that are trying to, science is trying to give us why all these crazy things are happening, and why the world's gone crazy, and the water is contaminated, and the grass is burned up, and we have nothing to eat, and the animals have gone crazy, and all that kind of stuff. All the equations that they try to come up with, this angel is going to set the record straight. We've already had these preachers, but this angel will set the record straight in the rest of the world. And that's why he says he will preach the everlasting gospel to every nation, every kindred, every tongue, and people. So nobody get left out. and they'll be set straight. This angel is going to be saying, fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth, the sea, and the fountains of water. Now that's a big deal at this time because there's no water to drink. I mean, the water's been contaminated. So we've already talked about the wormwood that the water is called because it's poison. And there followed another angel saying, okay, this is the next angel, the second angel, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the winepress of the wrath of her fornication. Now, who is this? Well, I want you to understand something. The word Babylon comes from back in Genesis chapter 11 at the Tower of Babel, okay? During that time, there was this man named Nimrod who was encouraging people to worship the stars, and they were building a tower to heaven, and he was this massive leader. And this was in the place today that is known as Babylon in Iraq. And our soldiers have been over there. So, matter of fact, even Saddam Hussein was rebuilding the city of Babylon. This is the same scenario that Daniel talked about because the Israelite Jews were taken out of Israel, and the northern kingdom was taken to Babylon. Really the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was taken to Assyria, which is Nineveh, where Jonah went and preached 100 years prior to that. But they were taken away into Assyria, and the Syrians were conquered by the Babylonians. Then the Babylonians conquered the southern kingdom of Israel because they had split. And Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego and all that crew came into Babylon. Now they were defeated too by the Medes and the Persians while Daniel and his group was there. But the Babylon has always stood for rebellion against God. I've got another way. I don't need God. I've got another way. And so this is where God caused their languages to be confounded at the Tower of Babel. At the Tower of Babel, which is what we have today, Babel. You know, you babble, you're just making noise and you're not making any sense. Well, this is a picture of the life without God. If the life is without God, you just make noise, you don't make any sense. And so what he's saying here is, at this point in time, now God has allowed this Babel, making noise, living life apart from God, but making no sense, to carry on, all from the fall of man on up. Those of us who came out of that world, and I had to say, I got saved at 17 years of age, came out of that world. Those of us that came out of that world, we came out of that world and brought our life to some sense when we came to God, we came to Christ. Now our life means more than just something we can do day in and day out, going to sleep, getting up, eating, working, making money, buying things, going back to sleep, waking up the next day. It's more than that. Our lives are centered around not just, our own needs, but the needs of the kingdom. And being able to have a longevity here. We're eternal beings, and we're going to be with God eternally. So it gave us a purpose bigger than ourselves. Well, these have no purpose bigger than themselves. Therefore, their life is considered a life of babble, just noise. But at this time he says, and there followed another angel, which is saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because it made all the nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of fornication. Now, is this an actual city? I think so. I think it will be. It's in Iraq even now. Even now, it's there now. It's just not as big as it once was, but it used to be really something. And they say even now, before the war, Saddam Hussein was trying to rebuild it back. And it's there even now. But it is an actual city. But I think it stands for something more than the city. It stands for the rejection of God. And so he is saying it's done. It's this rejection of God stuff is over. And so he is about to turn the knob and finalize it all. And so the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man will worship the beast in his image and receive his mark. Now we're down to the purifying of the last ones now. This is the last hurrah. This is the last thing. If any man will worship the beast, the Antichrist, and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the winepress of the wrath of God. Now listen, which is poured out without mixture upon the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels, in the presence of the Lamb. And so this is a declaration by this third angel, okay? By this third angel. First angel preaches. Second angel announces the fall of Babylon. The third angel announces that if you fall for the Antichrist trickery and take the mark of the beast, you are condemned. I mean, that's what the third angel says here. And he says, you hook up with him, then you're going to be under the wrath of Almighty God without mixture. I mean, there's no grace going to be involved. Nothing. There's no help. There's no hope. There's no grace. There's no peace. There's nothing. You're going to be under the wrath of Almighty God. And not only are you going to be under the wrath of Almighty God, you're going to spend eternity under the wrath of Almighty God. So you better think twice before you hook up with him. And so remember, the gospel's been preached through the heavens. And every tongue, every nation, every tribe, every people has heard from the angel of God. They heard from these 144,000. They saw them on TV. They heard about their preaching and how they said what was going on, why it was going on, how it was going on, and God was behind it all. And then these two prophets who had power to do whatever they could do, made everybody mad. Eventually, they allowed themselves to be killed. They heard all that, but now they've heard from an angel, a supernatural angel who declared truth. So there's no way to get this wrong. You get this wrong, you're doomed forever. So it was the last invitation, really. And so God is, out of mercy, reaching out to these folks to try to help them. He went on to say, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And I heard the voice from heaven say, write, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, thus saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labor, and their works do follow them. Okay, really what he's doing is he's making a distinction between those who follow the Antichrist and those who reject him. Because at this point, I mean, it's down to the place where you're pretty well going to have to reject the Antichrist and just literally die. Either you get killed or you starve to death. And you're either going to do one or the other. There's no two ways about it. And he's kind of got it to where you can't ignore this any longer. You're going to make a decision. But he went on to say, blessed are those who are willing to die in the Lord. In the Lord. Because, yea, their spirit, saith the Spirit, they'll rest. Now that other bunch is never going to rest. Those that take the Antichrist mark and fall into his mess, they will never rest. But this group, they may die, but they will rest. And let me say something to you. Listen to me. Some people kill themselves when they can't bear what the world throws at them. And they think they're getting out of it when really they're going to a worse hell a lot of times. Now, I'm not saying that people can't be saved and commit suicide. It happens. I hate to say that, but I believe it does happen. But people are not right in the head when they do. And matter of fact, Ephesians chapter 5, he says, a person that hurts his own body is not right. There's something wrong with him. Nobody hurts their own body that's in right mind. And so when a person does that, they got to be out of their mind. Personally, most of the people that I've ever been around that's committed suicide usually are drugged up or drunk, which is the same thing. You're on some kind of drug. You're drugged up or you're drunk. And so without question, there's an issue there. But what I'm trying to say is people say, let's say a person is sick and in the hospital and in bad shape and they die. And you say, I'm happy for them, for they're out of their pain. Well, if they're Christians, they're out of their pain. If they serve the living God through Jesus Christ, and this is very important, they're out of their pain. But if they're not Christians, they're going to a worser pain. And we've got to be honest enough to say that. It is just the facts. Here, he is saying there's two choices only. Either you follow the Antichrist, it's down there where it's a filtering. You're either going to follow him, receive the mark of the beast, or you can't live. But if you're willing to die for Christ, you will rest for eternity. I mean, that's really what he's saying here. I heard a voice saying unto me, write this down. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth, yea, saith the Spirit, that they may rest from their labor, and their works do follow them. The fact that they were willing to die for the Lord will follow them into heaven. In verse 14, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like to the Son of Man, which is Jesus. Okay? Now, through the book of Revelation, Jesus shows up in symbolism. In chapter 5, of course, he showed up as a lamb slain, as if it had been slain, throat cut. Here, he shows up on a cloud. I mean, other times he shows up as an angelic being. Here he shows up on a cloud, and he's called Son of Man. Son of Man, which is what the New Testament called Jesus a lot anyway. Having on his head a golden crown, and had a sharp sickle in his hand. Now, what is a sickle? For those who are not farm people, what is a sickle? Years ago, the farmer didn't have a combine that combined the wheat. They didn't have a machine that did it. And so they would go out into the field, and they had a long wooden handle that was usually bent, molded, had a handle on it here and a handle here. And they would walk up to the wheat and cut it off at the bottom and let it fall. And they would glean the wheat, cut the wheat, and it would fall. Then they would come and pull the wheat up and tie it together and take it to the threshing floor, where they would separate the wheat from the chaff. And the chaff, of course, being the stalks, and the wheat being the seed on the end of the stalk. And so they would cut the stalk off at the bottom. It would fall. They would come back and gather it together, and they would tie it in a bundle, and they would load it up and take it to the house, and they would put it at the threshing floor. And of course, in the process of time, as it dried out, they would take it into the threshing floor, and the wind would be there, and they would take a threshing tool, like a pitchfork, and they would throw it up in the air, and the wind would blow the chaff away, and the wheat would fall to the ground. And so what would happen is he would continually go in there and do this, and it would separate the wheat from the chaff, and the chaff would go over there, and the wheat would fall. And so before you know it, he had a pile of wheat under him with no chaff, no stalks, nothing but wheat there because of the weight of it. Well, here he's giving us a picture. And he says here, and I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and one that sat upon that white cloud, having the head a golden crown on his head, and in his hand was a sharp sickle. Okay, in this day, you could have a sickle in your hand. You wouldn't have to have it on a pole. They made them in different ways, but it was a hand sickle. Matter of fact, I think I have one in my barn. It belonged to my father-in-law many, many years ago. Now we have machines that do most of that. But he said, another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, and said to him, thrust in thy sickle and reap. Now, why would someone come out of the temple, the temple is in heaven. We're talking about in heaven, this temple in heaven. And he would cry to the Lord, or to the one sitting on the cloud, which is the Son of Man, which is Christ, and say, thrust in thy sickle. It's time. It's really what we're saying here. The imagery here is saying, it's time. Thrust in thy sickle, reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he said, and he that sat upon the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And the angel that came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle, another came out from the altar, which had the power over fire, cried with a loud voice to him that had the sickle, saying, thrust in thy sickle, and gather the clusters of the vines of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and the blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horse's bridle, but the space of 1,600 furlongs, about 200 miles, 10 feet high. 10 feet high, 200 miles, which this is Armageddon. Okay, this is a summary of the last battle. Now, let's just back up, because what we've done is we started this by setting a template. You say, what do you mean by that? We started this by saying, that we know what Jesus said. When Jesus was here, he told us these things were going to happen. Of course, it was all in the Old Testament anyway, but it was such a mystery scattered all through the Old Testament. Jesus came, he began to put it all together. And now we followed that up with the epistles, the letters of Paul, Peter himself, and what they said about it after Jesus had said what he had to say about it, which set a template. Now, then we got into the book of Revelation, which is fulfilling that template. So let's back up right here. Now, we're talking about the angel declaring that Jesus now is going to reap not only just the good, but the bad. I mean, we're going to gather everybody and we're going to separate them. And he said he took that and threw it into a wine press. I mean, we're talking about gathering grapes. You go out and gather grape and we're going to make wine, but it was blood. Now, where does this go on Jesus' statement? Well, if you back up to Matthew chapter 13, if you remember the story Jesus told in Matthew chapter 13, when he told the story about the wheat and the tares. In chapter 13, Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man which sowed good seed in the field. And he said, but while men slept, in his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up, the grass, the wheat and the tares, brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. The servant of the house, a holder, came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou put good seed in the field? From whence then hath it tares? Now, when a wheat farmer would sow wheat, he would sow the wheat, and the wheat would come up, but also the grass around it that looked like wheat, but it wasn't wheat. Now, if you ever look at a wheat field, especially when it's ripe to harvest, it gets brown, a beige, and it starts to get ready to harvest, there's always a group of tares in that field. And the tares will stand up a head taller than the wheat. Okay, now you can tell the difference because the tare stands up straight, but the wheat bows. Now I'm told that the reason that the wheat, when it gets up there and it gets ripe, it begins to bow is because the oil that's in that wheat. Now, tare don't have that oil in it. Of course, oil represents the Holy Spirit. And so when you look across a wheat field and you see these wheat heads up there doing this, but the tare right here, you can recognize, but we didn't know it before. Before they looked exactly the same. But once they got ripe to cut, the wheat bowed, but the tare didn't bow. And so here he uses that analogy and that picture in Matthew chapter 13 when he says that a wheat farmer went forth and sowed his good seeds in the field, but his enemy came behind him and sowed tares in the field. And they grew up together. And they looked just alike at one point. But when they got to the harvest time, ripened to harvest, they didn't look just alike. You could tell the difference. And he said, so the servants of the house came unto him, said, Sir, did you not sow good seed in the field? Whence has these tares? And he said unto them, An enemy has done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while you gather the tares, you root up also the wheat. He said, you can't tell the difference. But let both of them grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say unto the reapers, Gather you together the first tares, bind them in the bundles, but burn it to burn them, but to gather the wheat into my barn. I mean, this is a blessing to be able to understand this, because he is saying this is what's going to happen. I mean, there will come a time when we will gather the wheat into the barn, but the tares, those that are not mine, that have been sowed among my people, will be gathered and burned. Now, went on across the page here in chapter 13, he explains this. All these things spake Jesus to the multitude in parables, and without parables spake he not unto them, that it may be fulfilled which was spoken of the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables. But now we look down here in verse 37 of chapter 13, he kind of explains that and puts it into the segment that we're reading today in the book of Revelation, the end. He said, He that soweth good seed in the field is the Son of Man, which same term used in Revelation chapter 14. The field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world. The reapers are the angels. Therefore, the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, which is hell. And so it shall be in the end of the world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath an ear, let him hear. Now that's what we're reading in the book of Revelation chapter 14, that very fulfillment. Exactly what Jesus said would take place is going to take place. And of course, we see it coming to pass here in Revelation chapter 14. Cast in thy sickle, reap, which is the sickle was the wheat harvest. Of course, he used an analogy also of gathering grapes because they were big into grape harvesting in vineyards. And he said when you gathered them, you put them into the wine press and you squeezed them. And of course, he gave the imagery of this being the wrath of God, the wine press of the wrath of God. And as the wine press was put, they were put in the wine press, then there was blood. And he said it's deep as 10 foot high, 200 miles long, which is really the valley of Armageddon. Valley of Megiddo, which we call it the Battle of Armageddon. So he's given us a picture of what's about to happen. Now this is chapter 14. This is chapter 14. And as we look at this, I mean, I could say a whole lot, but this is the beginning of the final chapter. The beginning of the final phase that will happen on the planet. So I'm going to do chapter 14. I'm going to break and I'm going to come back and do chapter 15 behind it here for next week. But I want you to understand that we are at that middle segment. It's from here it's downhill. I mean, from here it's downhill. Now we've got 3 phases of preaching. Here it's downhill. Here's the separation time. Here's the time when things would take tremendous shape. Now we've learned here in this summary, God will establish his kingdom on the earth in spite of Satan's opposition. Last night, really, this is being pre-recorded. Today's Thursday, which I usually broadcast live, but I'm trying to pre-record because we're in Facebook jail. We can't be on Facebook, so I'm trying to get it where we can put it up there. And so God will establish his kingdom on the earth despite Satan's opposition. Jesus said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell, not just the person of the devil and all of hell, everything that hell can muster, the kingdom of hell cannot stop the church. Well, that's the church. Well, even after the church is removed, the will of God will take place. And so here we learn that God will establish not only his church will be gone, but his kingdom on this earth will be established, and all of hell will not be able to extinguish it. Number 2, we learn that men who reject the gospel and the grace today are in danger of facing awful judgment tomorrow. Think about that. Those who reject the gospel of grace today will be in danger of facing awful judgment tomorrow. It is better to die for Christ's sake and have eternal glory than to live for the devil and suffer eternally. Say that again. It is better to die for Christ and have eternal glory than to live for the devil and suffer eternally. And number 3, the nations of the world are today leading up to Armageddon, without question. We'll see the rise of the Russians and the Egyptians and the African nations, and they will be against Israel. And we'll see also the coming of the Federation of Europe, and that'll be, of course, against Israel. But man's final war against God will end up in a dismal failure, for Satan and his allies will fail. Now, what will happen is this. Once they begin to march on Israel, they will really be marching on God. And God will take care of them. And it will be what we call the final battle before the 1,000-year reign. There will really be 2 battles. There'll be the final battle before the 1,000-year reign, and there'll be a battle at the end of the 1,000-year reign, which we'll deal with later. But this is the Armageddon. This is the one that takes place right before Jesus comes in the air and takes over the world. And really, they'll march on Israel, they'll march on Jerusalem, but really, actually, they're marching on God. And so, chapter 14 is really kind of the beginning of the final stage of harvest. It's the beginning of the final stage of harvest. And so we see the people of God, the preaching of God through the 144,000, the two prophets, and, of course, the angels. And now the sickle has been, Matthew chapter 13 is being fulfilled. The end has begun. The harvest has begun. And from here on down, that we will see the harvest take place. Last half of the 7-year tribulation period. All right? May God bless you. And we'll see you next time when we are in Revelation chapter 15. And that is the 7 last vials. God bless you.